Happy Thursday. Welcome, everyone. Really appreciate you being here. So, I'm going to give what's called a Dharma talk, and Dharma talks are considered dark to the mind and radiant to the heart. So, the idea is we'll talk a little bit about sort of a way to apply Buddhist stories and principles to some sort of modern context, and then we'll have some questions. So, welcome. I wanted to actually start today with a koan. So within Zen, there is a tradition of what's called Zen koans. So like there's famous ones like, does a dog have Buddha nature, or what is the sound of one hand clapping? If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? But there's slogans, statements, riddles, stories, quotations, interactions between teachers, and the way you work with them is that you meditate with them and you try to find a way to express what the koan is teaching in a live way. So it's the difference between saying like, okay, so I'm trained as a trauma therapist, right? So I could explain like, well, there's 3 stages of trauma healing. So there's grieving, and then there's safety, and then grieving, and then integration. And I can give you like all the theory, right? But like, if I say, well, what is it like to heal trauma? It's going to be something more like, that's alive, right? You see the difference? So when we do koan study, what we're doing is we're learning to express these principles in a lived way. And so, I'm going to start at a place where people frequently find wisdom, which is talking a little bit about internet comment sections. Because I was looking at an internet comment section the other day and I ran across something that made me have a thought about that space, right? And what does that really mean, right? So I think everyone in the room is self-aware of the fact that we currently in our civilization have, we'll say, a high degree of polarization. Right? So people struggle to find common ground, and if you take away personal accountability, right? Like if I come up to Dan and I say a bunch of toxic things to him, well, he's right here, right? So he's going to get to hold me accountable, and by the way, the rest of you can do the same. But if we add anonymity, right, then all of a sudden my toxicity has no mechanism for accountability. And weirdly, that got me thinking about a Zen master who lived from 782 to 865 CE in China. I think it's useful to think of these people as just being people. And they just lived a human life. And so his name is Tokusan Seikan. So Tokusan, that's his Japanese name, but Tokusan lived during the Tang Dynasty. And what's interesting about Tokusan is that before he became a Zen master, he was a scholar. And there's actually a very famous koan about this. So we all know what a scholar is, right? A scholar is an academic. And Tokusan lived during the golden age of Zen. And so that is one of the most literary periods of Zen. If you study Zen seriously, you'll start reading something like the Blue Cliff Record. There's like koan collections that come out of that time. And so he considered himself to be the king of the Diamond Sutra. So the Diamond Sutra is a very famous Buddhist writing, right? Supposedly the words of the Buddha. So if you're imagining like a modern analog to this, imagine someone who, teaches theology at Harvard, right? And so in China, there was different schools of thought based on different geographic regions, and he was traveling through China, going from the north to the south. And he met a wise woman on the road, as people in these stories are wont to do, who was selling rice cakes. And she said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm Tokusan. I'm king of the Diamond Sutra. And I'm traveling to the south to extinguish these Buddhist teachings outside the scriptures." So Zen, he's a master of the scriptures. Zen is a teaching which doesn't rely on scriptures, right? It relies on mind-to-mind transmission. And she said, "Oh, okay, well, in the Diamond Sutra, it says, the mind of the present cannot be grasped. The mind of the future cannot be grasped. And the mind of the past cannot be grasped. So with which mind, venerable monk, will you eat this rice cake?" He had no answer. And so effectively what she said is, well, there's a Zen monastery right down the road and you should maybe take a look. He ends up becoming a very famous Zen teacher in his own right, and he was famous for a very vigorous teaching style, and including a quote which goes like this: if you speak rightly, 30 blows. If you speak wrongly, 30 blows. Meaning, if you say the right thing, I'm going to hit you 30 times. If you don't say the right thing, I'm going to hit you 30 times. This isn't really about beating people up, right? But what is it about? Right? I thought Zen was all about compassion, and now we're talking about this famous Zen master that is threatening to kick your butt no matter what you do. Like, what the heck is going on here? That's why it's a koan. So we pretty quickly begin to understand what this style of teaching is about, right? These koans, they don't make intellectual sense. And so we have to look within them and look at them experientially. So what is the experience? Well, have you ever had the experience of something along the lines of, no matter what I do, nothing ever works out for me, right? Every time I, get into a new situation, it's not right. Things were going so well, but something always comes up. Right? If you do the right thing, suffering. If you do the wrong thing, suffering. But also, if you put something on the internet, 30 blows, right? If you don't put something on the internet, 30 blows, right? Because if you don't put anything up, it's like, oh, well, you're not branding, you're not branding yourself. You're not getting out there. You need to be on LinkedIn. You need to be networking. You need to, right? If you do put things up, then everyone's arguing with you. I saw a comment thread that just in the Civil War, there's the Battle of Gettysburg. There's a part of the battle called Pickett's Charge, where these Confederates ran and unsuccessfully attacked the Union lines. And so someone had just put a video of how far that actually was. Like, they just ran the distance. And it's really far. It's way farther than I thought it was. And so my comment was like, wow, I didn't know that was that far. And so my great-great-grandfather happened to fight in the Civil War and he was wounded and didn't get to that battle. And lived, and so I get to exist, right? And so I said, I'm really glad my grandfather or my great-great-grandfather didn't have to do that. And then all of this screed started up about, how the evils of slavery and the evils of the Confederacy, and I'm like, agree, but like also not, like, do we see how the ego comes in and is like, well, let's have a fight about this. And it's like, well, I don't disagree. Like, and what I actually did is I posted a link to a book called Robert E. Lee and Me, which is, there's a Southern Army colonel who teaches history at West Point named Ty Sigilly, who went to Washington Lee University and grew up in Virginia, and then like completely changed. He ended up writing like an academic treatise on the lost cause mythology and how civil rights advancements would then be followed by a spur of monument building, and how we called things the wrong things, and you shouldn't say plantation, you should say slave farm. And so he like completely becomes this like liberal shining light historian, having come out of that lost cause culture. So hopefully that helped the person recognize that I wasn't, trying to engage in Confederate flag waving, but that's kind of my point, is that 30 blows no matter what. And so we have to find an alternate way of relating to reality, right? You have to find an alternate way of thinking. And if you go back to Tokusan, what's interesting is he actually this is the time he lived in is called the Golden Age of Zen because of how productive it was in terms of writing, but it also involved a tremendous amount of persecution. So there was a lot of wealth held by Zen monasteries in the Tang Dynasty, and they ended up, a lot of the non-rural monasteries got raided or burned, and all the monks had to return to civilian life. And so this person is not much like now. The Dharma doesn't function in ideal conditions because there are no ideal conditions. We're always reaching for like, what is the ideal condition? When I arrive at the time and place that's the thing I want to achieve, then I'll be happy. And that doesn't mean we don't have goals. What it does mean is we don't identify with goals as the solution to anything, right? Other than maybe what they're the solution for. Like if I wanted to be a social worker, so I went and got a social work master. So yeah, that is a solution to becoming a social worker, but it's not a solution to anything else, right? It's not going to make me happy. It's not going to, cause me to be more full or more whole. And the reason that academic success, money, professional achievement, wealth, relationships are not going to make you whole is because you are already whole, right? You're perfect and complete. You're lacking nothing. Right? When we sit and we're in our meditation and we're in the field of awareness, what's missing? Peace is available right here in a garage in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Right? Not because I've constructed something peaceful, but because it exists everywhere. Right? Viktor Frankl is a very famous author and thinker who was in the concentration camps during World War II. Talking about a lot of war in this Dharma talk. I wasn't expecting to do that, but here we are. His most famous quote is paraphrased by saying, "There's a space between a stimulus and our response, and therein lies our freedom." Mm-hmm. So if we contextualize that based on a concentration camp, right? The stimulus is I'm in a concentration camp. The response is whatever the response is. Between the two things, that's where your freedom lives. And that's true. And that's what meditation is. It's gaining that freedom of having the space between stimulus and response. And, I often joke that, nobody gets, one of these because everything went well. Same thing with wanting to be a social worker, same thing with working in the field of addiction treatment, right? All of these things, typically you don't get into those things without some kind of history. And for me, one of the things I noticed is that I used to not have any space between my stimulus and my response, and I tended to do things that made my life worse and made the people around me less happy and created suffering because I wasn't free of my own patterns. And as I, became more deeply engaged with Zen and, worked closely with a teacher, I started to recognize, the best moment, the most notable moment for that was I had a really intense conflict with my wife. And, we'd basically been yelling back and forth, but really I was primarily doing most of the yelling. But in my mind, she was wrong. And so I called my Zen teacher and told him the story, and the content doesn't even matter, right? But I told him everything, and he was like, well, would you rather be right or would you rather be married? And I was like, I did not take that well. I was like, but I am right, and more defensiveness, right? But over time, as we talked it through, what I started to recognize was, wait, why do I need to be right? Right? Let's pretend that my wife is 100% wrong. Okay, so the person I love and am choosing to spend the rest of my life with isn't allowed to be wrong? Well, that means she has to be perfect all the time. Or I'm going to yell and scream and rant and rave and be a jerk? I think I'd actually rather be married. Right? And so that was the beginning of a sort of a different relationship with my inner life. Whereas before that, I felt like I tried to be this kind, helpful, patient person. Like I had a certain type of childhood, and I made agreements with myself that I would not act a certain way and I wouldn't do certain things. And mostly I was successful at that. But then occasionally the ability to hold it all together would fall apart, and I would yell and scream and rant and rave just like my family system did. And I didn't understand why I couldn't ever fully get free of it. It's like, well, because you're holding it in, because you're repressing it. You're not resolving it. Because resolution is, okay, I'm feeling this, I stop, I feel it, and notice it, and then I make choices about what I'm going to do. Well, that's freedom, because now I'm getting to make choices. I'm not just, there is a space between the stimulus and the response. And so think about, what would that look like in the world? Right? Why do we teach the Dharma? Because it offers things like this. What would that look like if our political leaders had a space between stimulus and response, right? What would that look like if in everyone's relationships they were like, ooh, I don't like the way that made me feel. I wonder why that is. Let me be curious about what's inside, right? things would look very different, I suspect. And so Tokusan with his 30 blows, right? It's not fatalistic. It's liberating. What he's saying is, you need to accept that there is no right version of you, because there is no fixed version of you. It's just you. Your Buddha nature, your undifferentiated Buddha nature, which is perfect and complete and pure. Why is it pure? Because it has no fixed characteristic. How could it be dirty? How could it be wrong? How could it be incorrect or insufficient? Right? Something that we experience, right? It's not just a teaching. I'm not telling you this, right? This is within. So you go within, and there it is. Athletes call it the zone. Martial artists call it Budo, right? Martial spirit. Have you ever there's an analogy that, it's like pulling a blanket over you in the night when it's cold, right? Or reaching for a pillow in the night when you've fallen off of your pillow. You don't have an action plan to get your pillow back under your head. Just do it. But what else could be like that? Right? Could compassion spontaneously arise and be like as simple as adjusting a pillow when you're half asleep? All these analogies that lean on being half asleep do so because the mind is calmed down. And so when we relate to the world in relationship with me, with the I, then I'm always either elevating or criticizing the self. I'm either aggrandizing the self, right? I'm going to do a bunch of affirmations about how wonderful I am and try to, go take on the world. Or I'm, stuck thinking about the past and my inadequacies. And I'm fond of saying that, everyone has perfect clarity about what they should have done after the fact. But why in the world would you use that as a measuring stick for anything other than future improvement? It's reasonable to say, oh, I messed that up, need to do it differently. That's fair. But that doesn't mean anything about you, right? You see the difference? So there's this notion of, no fixed self is so radical that it's so subtle that we don't see it. Because the noise is so strong. I have to be, if I could just be this version, then all the things will line up. But they never seem to. Right? Like you get to the finish line and then there's another finish line, or you don't get to the finish line anyway, or it never quite satisfies. Like the thirst is never quite quenched. And so the move then is just notice the desire as it arises. Notice the identification as it arises. Let it go. It'll change. All of a sudden then 30 blows have no power over you. Right? There's another famous Zen teacher named Dogen who brought Zen from China to Japan. And there's a story where he was essentially called to the bedside of a mentally ill samurai. And so in samurai times, the samurai were like feudal lords. So you got to think about like a mid-level government official, like a governor or something. Someone with some power, right? Like a little army, some power. He gets called to the bedside of this mentally ill samurai because no one can help him. And they thought, well, maybe this wise Zen master can help. And the samurai kind of becomes enraged and pulls out his sword and says, "Don't you know I can kill you without a second thought?" And Dogen looks right at him and says, "Don't you know I can be killed without a second thought?" And that was the beginning of them working together. Not that I want us to be suicidal. But I want you to be authentic without a second thought. Right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's next. You move forward in life with intention, we make plans, and we leave a gap. Leave a gap. That way we can treat the world the way we treat thoughts. Thoughts arise, notice them, let them go, come back to the breath. Situations arise, we notice them, we work through them, come back to our center. It's a circular thing. Right? These two things relate to each other. So, silence the comments section in your head, right? The thing that we see on the internet is just a reflection of what's going on inside the human mind. Don't say things to yourself that you wouldn't let others say to you. Right? Notice it. Let it go. Come back. And that's the whole thing. Thank you all. So